What if the gas lamps of the 1800s were never about burning gas at all? What if those ornate iron pillars that still stand in old photographs were the last visible terminals of a forgotten energy network, a kind of ancient technology quietly rebranded as street lighting in our history books? We are told a very simple story. Long before electricity defined the shape of our cities, long before neon and sodium vapor lamps turned night into an artificial dawn, people wandered through streets lit only by fire. According to the conventional timeline, the early 19th century was dim and uneven. Whale oil, tallow, and primitive piped gas, feeding small, flickering flames in fragile glass boxes. Public lighting, we're assured, was patchy at best. Nighttime photography barely existed. The world after sunset was mostly shadow. And yet, that is not what the visual record shows. When we start actually looking at old photographs, engravings, architectural surveys, and restoration drawings, a different picture begins to emerge. We see vast boulevards in Paris, London, New York, St. Petersburg, Prague, Vienna, and beyond, lined with enormous, heavily engineered lamp posts. Bases as thick as modern utility boxes. Columns that look like temple pillars more than simple supports. Lamp heads crowned with domes, plates, vents, coils, and needle-like terminals that resemble electrical hardware, not crude holders for a flame. They are officially classified as gas lamps, but they do not look like devices designed merely to hold a small, smoky fire. They look like machines. This is where the mystery of the forbidden gas lamps of Tartaria truly begins. Because once we stop treating these structures as quaint decorations and start studying them as potential components of a system, things become deeply unsettling. The design language is consistent across continents long before mass industrial globalization. The level of overengineering is far beyond what a cheap municipal flame would require. And crucially, when we examine early night photographs from the late 1800s, we find streets that appear sharply, evenly illuminated, at a time when no known high-powered lighting technology is supposed to have existed at that scale. The standard explanation is always the same: long exposure. The camera, we are told, simply collected the weak light for many seconds or minutes, making the street appear brighter than it really was. But long exposure does not create uniform distribution of light where none exists. It amplifies what is already there. If only a few tiny flames were struggling in glass boxes, we would expect bright halos around each lamp and deep pools of darkness between them. Instead, many of these images show something closer to a continuous, gentle wash of light, as if the entire street were part of a coordinated grid. Then there is the way these lamps are placed. In city after city, the earliest posts are spaced with uncanny regularity. They align with plazas, intersections, and building facades in ways that look less like ad hoc urban lighting and more like the deliberate geometry of a network. Grids, radial patterns, symmetrical layouts. If this were merely about illuminating a few meters of road for pedestrians and carriages, why such precision? Why such global consistency? Official history shrugs and calls it fashion. Local foundries, we are told, copied each other, spreading a Victorian aesthetic around the world. But that explanation begins to crack when we notice how many of these lamps were quietly removed or drastically simplified just as electricity and modern infrastructure took over. The most elaborate designs often disappear first. Entire generations of these posts are removed at startling speed, melted down, smashed at the base, or ripped out of their foundations. In many places, not only the pole, but the pavement beneath it is completely dug up and replaced, as if the true importance of the system lay not in the visible lantern above, but in whatever was anchored below, Alternative researchers use terms like hidden history, lost technology, atmospheric electricity, Tartarian architecture, free energy. They argue that what we call gas lamps might instead be repurposed remnants of a prior energy infrastructure, one that harvested or channeled power through the very fabric of cities. Rooftops, spires, crowns, finials, and lampposts, all working together as parts of a unified field. We do not need to fully accept that theory to recognize that the evidence deserves more than a casual wave of the hand. So, in this investigation, we will walk slowly, carefully, through what survives. We will compare the official gaslighting narrative with the physical forms we can still see carved into stone and cast into iron. We will look at the global repetition of motifs that predate international mass manufacturing. We will examine the strange compatibility between 19th century lampposts and 20th century electrical retrofits, as if the poles had been waiting for wires that officially had not yet been invented. We will ask why some municipal records complain about unusually deep underground conduits beneath these lamps, laid out in patterns that resemble modern electrical or telecommunication grids far more than simple gas mains. We will not start by claiming impossibilities. We will start by asking questions. Why did so many early lamps look so wildly overbuilt for simple flame illumination? Why were similar designs standardized across continents before truly global manufacturing networks existed? Why did these overengineered posts vanish so quickly once modern infrastructure and photography became widespread? And why do they so often appear in front of buildings whose architecture already feels too advanced for their supposed time, the very structures that Tartaria theories focus on as relics of a forgotten civilization? This is part one of our journey through the forbidden gas lamps of Tartaria. Ancient energy, perhaps, hiding in plain sight. For now, we stand at the threshold. We have a world officially lit by gas and oil, and a visual record that hints at something more coordinated, more technological, more mysterious. We are not here to force a conclusion on you. We are here to look, to compare, to notice what doesn't add up. Because sometimes the fastest way to find a hidden system is simply to pay attention to what everyone else has learned to ignore. The lampposts we walk past every day, the crowns and terminals perched on rooftops, the underground conduits no one talks about. In the next part, we will step fully into the 19th century and reconstruct the world these lamps supposedly belonged to. We will examine the official timeline of gaslighting, the industrial capabilities of the era, and the rapid transformation of cities that just happened to coincide with the removal of these strange, overbuilt machines. And the deeper we go, the more a single quiet question will start to echo. If these were just lamps, why does everything about them feel like part of a much larger design? To understand why these lamps are so unsettling, why they stand out so sharply against everything the official story tries to tell us, we first have to recreate the world they supposedly belonged to. We have to step back into the 19th century, not as tourists armed with hindsight, but as observers entering a world in motion, a world under construction, a world rewriting itself faster than its people could fully comprehend. Because without that context, the strangeness of these lamps risks being dismissed as coincidence, as ornamentation, as the random flourish of a decorative age. But the moment we re-enter the 1800s with open eyes, the foundations of the story begin to shift beneath our feet. According to the conventional timeline, the early 1800s were still firmly pre-electric. Electricity was a laboratory curiosity, a faint whisper of what it would soon become. Benjamin Franklin's kite experiment lay decades behind. Faraday's breakthroughs were still rippling outward but had not yet transformed daily life. The telegraph had just begun its slow spread, and the idea of electrifying entire cities was the stuff of bold speculation rather than practical engineering. The world was powered by muscle, wind, water, steam, and at night by fire, flickering fire. Oil lamps and candles lit interiors. Streets, when lit at all, relied on whale oil or crude gas produced in small local batches. These early gas lighting systems were inconsistent, expensive, and fragile. A single broken pipe could plunge entire districts into darkness. Gas production plants belched smoke on the edges of cities, struggling to supply even small networks of lamps. Industrial capacity was limited, skilled metalworking was time-consuming and localized, and large-scale infrastructure projects were still clumsy and experimental. And yet, this is the same era in which we are meant to believe that tens of thousands of massive iron lamps were cast, installed, maintained, and fed with gas through elaborate underground systems that official records barely mention. The same era in which we are told that foundries with limited machinery crafted identical components across continents. The same era in which cities that still lacked sewer systems somehow managed to create perfectly regularized illumination grids. Take Paris, for example. Before Haussmann's reconstruction in the mid-1800s, the city was a labyrinth of medieval streets, twisting alleys, and unpredictable layouts. According to the narrative, gaslighting entered this chaotic map gradually, unevenly, constrained by topography and infrastructure. And yet, in many photographs and engravings from the 1840s and 1850s, we see lamps placed with geometric precision, spaced as if following a plan older and more deliberate than the streets themselves. Why would early gaslighting projects, still in their infancy, display the characteristics of a mature, integrated, almost industrially perfect system? Unless, of course, the layout wasn't designed for gas at all, but for something already embedded in the architecture long before gas arrived. London presents a similar contradiction. Official history says the first public gas streetlights appeared around 1807, but when you inspect early lampposts, the massive cast-iron columns in Westminster, Southwark, and Covent Garden, they look far too elaborate for the era's limited manufacturing capacity. Internal cavities are smooth and cylindrical, as if machined with precision tools decades ahead of their time. The bases are engineered, not simply cast, and when electricians in the early 1900s began retrofitting these posts with wiring, they found the interiors shockingly compatible, perfectly hollow, unobstructed, straight and deep, almost as if they were designed from the beginning to house electrical conduits. Why would a gas lamp, which only needed a simple hole for a pipe, require a cavity that seems tailor-made for future electrical wiring? We step across the Atlantic to New York City. By the 1850s, the city is said to have installed tens of thousands of gas lamps. Yet the infrastructure to feed them was inconsistent, and the gas companies themselves were embroiled in disputes over shortages, defects, and technical limitations. And yet, buried beneath the financial district, workers uncovered radial conduit systems, underground hubs from which multiple channels spread outward. Gas systems do not work like that. Gas flows directionally through continuous mains. It does not require spoke-like grids, but electrical or telecommunication networks do. Then we confront the photographs themselves. This is where the official narrative strains hardest. Night photography in the late 1800s, even with long exposure techniques, should have produced inconsistent, patchy light. A gas flame is not powerful. It casts soft, uneven illumination. It produces bright halos near the source and deep shadows beyond. But in many surviving images, the illumination is startlingly even. Streets glow uniformly from one edge to another. Buildings appear, lit from all directions, not just from a few tiny glass lantern flames. Long exposure cannot create light. It can only collect what exists. If the lamps were truly as weak as claimed, these photographs should reveal dramatic contrast, not a smooth, almost electric wash of light. This contradiction becomes even more pronounced when we compare engravings from earlier decades with photographs from later ones. Engravings, though stylized, often depict glowing cities with bright lamps consistent across entire boulevards. Artists exaggerate, yes, but they also capture impressions, the impression of abundant, stable light. But how abundant could light truly be in a pre-electrical city? How uniform, how synchronized across entire continents? And then there is the architecture. The lampposts of the 1800s share a visual vocabulary with buildings whose origins remain murky. Enormous facades with impossible stonework, geometric harmonics carved into columns, domes, spires, and finials that resemble resonant or capacitive components more than mere ornamentation. The very same shapes repeat on the lamp crowns. The filigree aligns. The copper inlays echo the detailing on rooftops. Many of these buildings predate the installation of gas lamps by decades or centuries. So were the lamps copying the buildings? Or were both remnants of a larger architectural system whose purpose we no longer understand? Even the behavior of cities during modernization raises questions. Why, during the transition to electrical lighting, did so many cities not merely replace the lamps, but rip out entire pavements, digging deep into the ground as if removing buried components that no modern system required? Why were the ornate lamps melted down rather than preserved, even as decorative artifacts? Why do records documenting their removal often contain gaps, omissions, or vague explanations? Why did they disappear so fast, almost globally synchronized, between 1880 and 1910? Official history offers mundane answers: modernization, standardization, aesthetics. But history rarely moves so synchronously, so quietly, so thoroughly, unless something deeper is being rewritten. And this is the world we must now examine more closely. A world where the supposed simplicity of gaslighting begins to crumble under the weight of its own inconsistencies. A world where overengineered lampposts might not have been designed for fire at all. A world where architecture and infrastructure may share a forgotten lineage. A world where the deeper you dig, the more you uncover layers of a technological language erased from the narrative. In the next part, we will begin assembling the anomalies systematically, the clues that break the official story apart one detail at a time. Because once you start listing them, the shape of the mystery becomes impossible to ignore. When you begin collecting the anomalies one by one, slowly, carefully, like an archivist examining fragments in a dimly lit room, you realize how quickly the official narrative starts to unravel. These details, at first glance scattered and harmless, begin forming patterns. And once those patterns emerge, they become impossible to dismiss. They tighten around the conventional story like a noose, pulling it apart thread by fragile thread. So let us look at the anomalies as they truly appear, not as isolated curiosities, but as symptoms of a deeper system that official history either overlooked or quietly erased. Each anomaly alone may be explained away, but all of them together? That is where the fabric of the narrative tears open. We begin with the problem of overengineering. The anomaly so large, so visually obvious, that it hides in plain sight precisely because no one expects it. Early 19th century gas lamps should have been simple structures: thin iron posts, small glass globes, basic valves. If their sole purpose was to hold a weak, flickering flame, then anything beyond that would be wasteful. But what we see instead are lampposts built like industrial machines. Their bases are massive, often carved stone or thick cast iron. Many are wide enough to support the weight of a full column. Why would a device meant to hold a small glass lantern require a foundation capable of bearing structural loads? And not just in one city. This pattern repeats across Paris, London, New York, St. Petersburg, Prague, Vienna, Buenos Aires, Delhi. The bases appear standard, engineered, intentional. Then we look upward. The pillars themselves, sometimes hollow, sometimes made of multiple cast sections, often with internal cavities, surprisingly smooth and cylindrical, show machining precision far beyond what many local 19th century foundries were capable of. Some early lampposts appear seamless, cast or machined as if from molds unavailable to the era. Others are assembled with interlocking components that resemble mechanical housings rather than simple poles for illumination. But the strangest element of all is the lamp head, the crown perched at the very top. Official records say these crowns were designed to vent heat, prevent rain, and decorate the streets. But when you study them closely, layered discs, perforated plates, spiral finials, hollow stems, copper inlays, you begin to see something else entirely. These crowns resemble early electrical components, primitive capacitors, resonant chambers, inductive coils, acoustic amplifiers. Their symmetry is too precise, their shapes too standardized, their designs too consistent across continents for mere decoration. Almost every gas lamp crown in the world seems to follow an architectural vocabulary that predates the supposed gaslighting era. Stacked metal plates separated by air gaps, dome structures shaped like bell resonators, needle-like rods resembling receiving terminals. Some crowns even include shapes identical to Tesla's experimental coil terminals, decades before Tesla was born. Coincidence? Fashion? A decorative trend that spontaneously emerged in dozens of countries across oceans and cultures? Perhaps. But only if we are willing to ignore what comes next, because the overengineered structure of the lamp is only the beginning. The placement of these lamps forms another anomaly, one far more mathematical. The earliest lamps, supposedly installed slowly and experimentally, appear in geometric arrangements far too precise for ad hoc planning. They align with plazas, building facades, church towers, and intersections with uncanny regularity. They form radial layouts, triangular grids, symmetries identical across cities separated by thousands of miles. Gaslighting infrastructure should reflect the organic chaos of pre-modern urban planning. It should weave awkwardly through old streets, adjust to irregular building placement, and adapt to the constraints of local geography. Yet the lamps do not behave this way. They behave like nodes of a network, placed exactly where they should be if they were part of a larger architectural system. Then comes the disappearance problem, perhaps the most revealing anomaly of all. If these lamps were simply gas fixtures, then their removal should leave a clear, logical record. Outdated equipment replaced by modern electric posts, old components stored or scrapped in documented cycles, clear municipal guidelines for removal and disposal. But the historical record is chaotic. Some cities removed their lamps decades before installing electrical replacements. Others ripped up entire pavements rather than simply swapping posts. In many cases, the ornate, Tartarian-looking lamps, the ones with the most distinctive crowns, were the first to vanish, often without explanation, replaced by simpler, bland poles. Why? Why remove the most beautiful, elaborate pieces first? Why melt them down, bury them, smash their bases, or drag them to rivers? Why eliminate them so aggressively rather than repurpose them? Why does the disappearance occur globally between roughly 1880 and 1910, almost simultaneously across Europe, Russia, India, the United States, and South America, without any shared governing body organizing the effort? Another anomaly emerges once we begin studying the underground infrastructures connected to these lamps. Gas lamps should require shallow pipes, simple junctions, and minimal underground complexity. Yet numerous cities, when excavated, reveal deep conduits, far deeper than any gas pipes would have needed. Some exhibit radial hubs, others show layered stone bases beneath lamps, with apertures or chambers far too large for gas. In New York, workers found junction stones, with multiple channels radiating outward like spokes. Gas systems do not function this way, but electrical or signal distribution systems do. We then look at photographic anomalies. The late 1800s should have produced dimly lit night scenes. Gas lamps are weak. They flicker. They cast uneven light. Long exposure photography can exaggerate brightness, but it cannot create uniform illumination where none exists. And yet, in many nighttime photographs from the 1870s, 1880s, even early 1890s, whole streets appear evenly lit from end to end. Buildings glow softly from top to bottom. Shadows are minimal. The light appears diffuse, electrical, almost modern. Were these lamps truly burning gas? Or were they drawing energy through their ornate crowns, through systems embedded in rooftops, through conduits hidden beneath the pavement? Then we encounter the global standardization problem, the most damning anomaly of all. In the early 1800s, manufacturing was local, primitive, inconsistent. Molds were made by hand, patterns varied by region. And yet, gas lamps across Europe, Asia, India, and the Americas share identical structural motifs. Crown shapes match, pillar fluting matches, vent patterns match, screw threading matches. Even alloy compositions match in ways that should be impossible if these lamps were locally cast by decentralized foundries with differing resources. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either the lamps were mass-produced by a global industrial system that did not yet exist, or they were remnants of an older infrastructure inherited, repurposed, and misinterpreted by the 19th century. Finally, we reach the rooftop connection anomalies, linking lampposts to finials, spires, domes, and terminals atop buildings. Many of these rooftop structures share the same shapes as lamp crowns. Some are hollow. Some connect to shafts that run straight down through the building. Others align perfectly with lamp grids below. Were these simply aesthetic echoes? Or were they once functional components of a unified architectural energy system? Taken alone, any one anomaly might be a footnote. Together, they become something else entirely, a constellation of clues pointing toward a carefully hidden layer of history. In the next part, we dive deeper, connecting these anomalies into a coherent pattern. Because once you see how they link, the mystery shifts from what were these lamps to what kind of system were they part of, and why was it erased so completely? The anomalies alone are intriguing, each one a loose thread that tugs at the edges of the official narrative. But when you begin pulling them together, slowly, methodically, without forcing a conclusion, you discover something far more unsettling. The threads begin to weave themselves into a pattern, not a modern pattern, not a Victorian flourish, but something older, deeper, more coherent, the kind of pattern you would expect from a system, not a series of coincidences. And once this realization dawns, the story of the 1800s changes shape completely. The first signs emerge when we compare placement, design, and function, not as separate categories, but as interconnected parts of an architectural puzzle. A gas lamp's position should be determined by practical illumination needs: corners, intersections, dark stretches of road. Instead, what we see in city after city is geometrical precision. Lamps placed at exact intervals, often matching the proportions of surrounding buildings, plazas, and monuments. Their alignment with rooftops, towers, and spires is too consistent to ignore. It is as if the lamps were designed to interact with the architecture around them, not merely to brighten the streets, but to correspond with the city landscape as a whole. Consider Paris. Before Haussmann's reconstruction, medieval streets twisted unpredictably, and yet the earliest lamp networks align with patterns predating the redesign, forming grids that do not correspond to illumination logic, but do correspond eerily to older architectural foundations. Why would a supposedly new technology conform to the footprint of an older city rather than the one being built? Unless the older layout was a functional template that the lamps were designed to integrate with. London reveals something similar. Westminster's early lamp posts, believed to date from the 1810s, contain hollow internal cavities machined to tolerances inexplicably precise for the era. These cavities were deep and uniformly smooth, perfectly suited for later electrical wiring, decades before those wires officially existed. Why would early lampposts anticipate a technology not yet invented? The simplest answer is also the most controversial. Perhaps the lamps were not designed in the 1800s at all. Perhaps they were inherited from an earlier infrastructural system repurposed for gas during a transitional era, much like a modern city might repurpose old telegraph poles as lighting fixtures without understanding their original design. Then there is New York, where excavations revealed radial underground conduits beneath lamp foundations. These radial patterns mimic electrical junction hubs, or telecommunication nodes, not gas distribution. The official record shrugs and calls the hubs primitive gas mains, even though gas systems do not use radial distribution. The geometry makes no sense for combustion-based lighting, but it makes perfect sense if these nodes once connected a network designed to distribute or receive something else: energy, signal, resonance. Now consider the crowns, the spires perched atop lampposts and rooftops alike. When studied as decorative elements, their symmetry and complexity seem excessive. When studied as functional components, they suddenly resemble inductors, capacitors, resonant chambers, shapes that appear in early electrical engineering and acoustics. But these forms repeat across continents, cultures, and architectural styles long before global standardization. Why? Why does a lamp crown in Paris match a rooftop finial in St. Petersburg? Why does a dome ornament in Buenos Aires mirror a streetlight crown in Delhi? These shapes appear not as spontaneous inventions, but as inherited templates, echoes of a design language whose purpose we no longer understand. Some researchers propose that these crowns were part of an atmospheric energy system. The idea is controversial, but not impossible. Before electrical grids existed, scientists like Franklin, Faraday, and later Tesla experimented with atmospheric charge. Buildings and towers fashioned with specific geometries could function as antennas or resonators. Could the ornate metal crowns, finials, and spires scattered across 19th century cities have once served a similar purpose, guiding atmospheric charge through architectural networks? Not as mystical devices, but as engineered components whose original function was lost through historical upheaval. This brings us to a crucial observation. The lamp's compatibility with later electrical wiring is not an accident. When electricians retrofitted these posts in the early 20th century, they found the interiors uncannily suitable for electrical cables. The conduits were already deep, straight, and unobstructed, the bases already anchored with unusually robust foundations. If these were truly built for gas, why would their internal structures match the needs of a completely different technology? It is almost as if electrical retrofitting wasn't innovation, it was restoration. Not adding something new, but reactivating a dormant capability the lamps already possessed. But nowhere does the pattern become more pronounced than in the accelerated removal period between 1880 and 1910. Across Europe, Russia, the United States, South America, Asia, entire cities began replacing their ornate lampposts with plain, modern ones. Not gradually, not haphazardly, but with startling coordination. Many ornate lamps were not merely unscrewed. They were smashed, melted, buried, their bases destroyed rather than removed intact. Why? Why destroy something instead of simply replacing it? Why eliminate the foundations, the underground conduits, the connections to the rooftops? The pattern suggests urgency, even secrecy. If these lamps were remnants of an older system, one incompatible with new centralized electrical grids, they would need to be removed quickly and thoroughly to prevent interference. The idea sounds dramatic until we consider the timing. This removal wave coincides exactly with the global rollout of centralized electricity and telegraph systems. It also coincides with the demolition, refacing, or modernization of countless Tartarian-style buildings with impossible stonework and unexplained architectural harmonics. The deeper we go, the more the narrative shifts from lamps as independent anomalies to lamps as nodes in a network. The crowns, the deep bases, the geometric alignments, the radial conduits, the compatibility with electricity, the shared design vocabulary across continents. These do not behave like random Victorian artistry. They behave like deliberate components of an architectural grid. And then there is the philosophical question. If this was truly a network, what was its purpose? Was it electrical, distributing atmospheric charge? Was it acoustic, channeling resonance through buildings? Was it thermodynamic, guiding heat or airflow? Or was it something else entirely? Something our modern framework is not equipped to categorize. To answer that, we must look beyond the lamps and into the larger architectural environment. Rooftops crowned with metal finials, towers topped with spires shaped like induction coils, domes lined with copper and arranged in patterns resembling capacitors, entire facades etched with geometric harmonics, street layout patterns that reflect electrical field lines. Could all these components have once been part of the same infrastructure? And if so, what kind of civilization built it? In the next part, we finally approach the hypothesis, the moment when the scattered anomalies coalesce into a single startling possibility. A possibility that challenges not only the story of the gas lamp, but the story of the 19th century itself. When you gather the clues, really gather them, not as scattered curiosities, but as deliberate pieces of an architectural riddle, there comes a moment where the evidence stops whispering and begins pointing. A moment when the anomalies no longer behave like random errors in the historical record, but like fragments of a buried blueprint. A blueprint too extensive, too consistent, too synchronized across the world to be accidental. And it is in that moment, often quietly, almost reluctantly, that the only possible conclusion begins to form. All these clues point to one almost unbelievable possibility. The gas lamps of the 1800s were not designed for gas at all. They were the repurposed terminals of a forgotten, decentralized energy network, an atmospheric or architectural power system inherited from an earlier civilization and later misinterpreted as simple street lighting. It is a bold theory, yes, but boldness does not make it untrue. And the deeper we follow the logic, the more this hypothesis stops feeling radical and begins feeling inevitable. Let us walk through the implications carefully. If the lamps were originally part of an atmospheric energy network, then their overengineering suddenly makes perfect sense. The massive stone and cast iron bases would not be unnecessary extravagance. They would be grounding mechanisms or resonant chambers. The fluted pillars would not be mere decoration. They would be structural waveguides for charge, vibration, or conduction. And the crowns, with their layered discs, hollow stems, perforated shells, and copper inlays, would not be whimsical ornamentation, but functional components, capacitors, inductors, resonators, electrode terminals. For the first time, the ornate engineering becomes logical, purposeful, even elegant. Then consider the global standardization that makes no sense in the 1800s. Identical motifs across continents that allegedly had no coordinated manufacturing systems. Under the gas lamp narrative, this is impossible. But under the hypothesis of inherited infrastructure, it becomes exactly what we would expect. If the lamps were remnants of a prior globalized system, what some call Tartaria, then the consistency is not a mystery, but a signature, a shared technological lineage, a unified architectural language. The same applies to placement. Gas lamps should appear wherever lighting is needed, but these lamps appear wherever geometry dictates. Their spacing follows harmonic intervals. Their positions align with rooftops, domes, spires, and underground conduits. The grid-like precision stops being a coincidence and becomes a map, an energy map, a system intentionally designed to channel, distribute, or resonate with environmental or atmospheric charge. Even the photographic anomalies, streets illuminated evenly long before electricity, align with this theory. Instead of relying on tiny flames, the lamps may have glowed through electrical excitation, plasma discharge, or resonant induction from atmospheric potential. Weak compared to modern electricity, yes, but far more powerful than a simple gas flame. This would explain why long exposure photographs reveal uniform brightness across entire boulevards. The camera was not exaggerating a weak flame. It was faithfully capturing a diffuse, grid-based illumination system operating beneath our historical radar. And then we reach the most damning correlation. The systematic removal of these lamps coincides perfectly with the emergence of centralized electrical utilities. Why would early electrical companies want decentralized atmospheric energy remnants standing in the streets? Why would telegraph companies tolerate unknown metal terminals that might interfere with signals? Why would governments building centralized grids allow public infrastructure that potentially harnessed energy directly from the environment? The removal suddenly becomes not just logical, but necessary. A decentralized system is competition. A system outside centralized control is unacceptable. If the lamps were nodes, visible terminals of a prior grid, then removing them was not modernization. It was erasure. Even the curious behavior of municipal workers begins to make sense. Why smash the bases? Why dig up pavements? Why bury the remnants instead of cataloging them? Because the bases may have contained the true machinery. Coils, chambers, conductive plates, resonant cavities. The visible lamp was merely the tip of an iceberg. The destruction focused on the foundations, because that is where the secrets were. This hypothesis also reframes the architecture surrounding the lamps. The crowns on rooftops suddenly look like antennas. The domes look like capacitors. The spires resemble coil terminals. The carved patterns on facades echo resonant geometries. The alignment of buildings forms circuit-like patterns. The cities themselves begin to look less like random accumulations of stone and more like engineered systems. The lamps were not isolated devices. They were the street-level interface of a larger architectural network. And perhaps the lamps were never meant to be lamps at all. Think of a modern traveler stumbling upon a 21st century cell tower in 1,000 years. Without context, they might call it a decorative pole, a relic of a primitive age. Without understanding the circuitry inside, they might assume aesthetic intent. Without knowledge of wireless technology, they might record its use incorrectly. This is exactly what the 19th century may have done with the remnants of an older system. Repurpose the hardware without understanding the underlying technology. Suddenly, the entire 1800s narrative shifts. We stop seeing the era as an age of invention and begin seeing it as an age of inheritance, a period when fragments of a lost civilization were repurposed, adapted, misunderstood, and eventually erased. Even the timeline agrees. By the 1880s, the global electrical grid was emerging. By the 1890s, telegraph networks were expanding. By the early 1900s, centralized power companies were consolidating energy distribution. A decentralized atmospheric system, if it still lingered, would have posed a silent threat. Not because it was mystical, but because it was free. Free energy destabilizes industries. Decentralized systems destabilize governments. Infrastructure that cannot be controlled must be removed. And so, between 1880 and 1910, they were removed. But the question that lingers beneath all of this is not simply, were the lamps part of a lost system, but something more explosive. If the lamps were the last visible terminals, then what else did this forgotten civilization build? And how much of it still surrounds us today? In the next part, we reinforce the hypothesis by addressing evidence that traditional historians avoid: metallurgy, underground networks, rooftop alignments, technical inconsistencies, and the counter-arguments that crumble under scrutiny. Because if this theory holds, then the gas lamps of Tartaria are not just curiosities. They are the smoking gun. Every bold hypothesis demands a second scrutiny. It is not enough to present a possible explanation. We must pressure test it, push against it, see whether it bends or breaks under the weight of what we know. And so, after proposing that the so-called gas lamps of the 1800s might have been terminals of a forgotten atmospheric or architectural energy network, we must now examine the remaining evidence, the kind often ignored or dismissed in historical narratives. Because when we take a closer look at metallurgy, underground networks, rooftop alignments, old engineering reports, and the standard counter-arguments, something unexpected happens. The conventional story begins to fracture, and the hypothesis, instead of weakening, becomes harder to refute. Let us begin with metallurgy, the silent witness of any technological system. When restorers in cities like St. Petersburg, Berlin, Barcelona, Buenos Aires, and Lisbon examined surviving lamp crowns, they documented alloys that seemed inconsistent with 19th century street furniture. Some crowns contained unusually pure copper, costly for decorative elements of the time. Others contained bronze alloys cast with thin, uniform layering that would have required precise temperature control, far beyond what small local foundries were capable of in the early 1800s. Even more curious, samples taken from rooftop finials in Russia and lamp crowns in Central Europe have been found to have nearly identical alloy compositions. But according to the accepted history, these items were manufactured by separate workshops, in separate countries with separate supply chains. How could materials match with such precision unless they came from a shared manufacturing template, either copied meticulously or inherited from a period before those nations became industrially distinct? Then we study the internal architecture of these lamps. Engineering reports from the early 1900s, written by electricians retrofitting the old lampposts, complain about unusually deep internal conduits, mysteriously smooth cavity walls, and unexpectedly consistent hollow shafts inside posts that should originally have contained nothing more than a narrow pipe. But these cavities were perfect for threading electrical wires. So perfect, in fact, that electricians frequently noted how conveniently designed the old posts were for electrification, as if the posts were waiting for wires that had not yet been invented. If the lamps were built solely for gas, why construct their interiors like future electrical conduits? Some argue that engineers simply overbuilt the posts. But overbuilding costs money, labor, and time. Gas lamps were intended to be functional, not prophetic. Yet their interiors behave as if they were intentionally designed with multifunctional capacity. Gas in one era, wires in another, but originally something else entirely. Now let us examine underground anomalies, perhaps the most damning evidence of all. Gas lines in the 19th century were shallow, narrow, and rudimentary. They did not require radial hubs, deep stone chambers, or multi-channel conduits. Yet in cities like Paris, London, New York, and Vienna, excavations reveal underground structures beneath lamp bases that defy gas system logic. Some have radial layouts, like spokes extending from a central node. Others have layered stone foundations, as if the base itself were part of a larger mechanism. In New York, junction stones were found beneath certain lamp posts, structures inexplicable in a gas framework, but perfectly consistent with electrical or signal distribution. These are not rare exceptions. They appear repeatedly, almost systematically, in the very cities with the most ornate lamps. If these lamps were simply gas fixtures, then why is the underground infrastructure beneath them so complex? And why does it resemble the architecture of electrical junctions that appeared decades later? Then there is the issue of rooftop alignments, a detail so often overlooked that it is almost invisible. In München, Florence, Prague, St. Petersburg, and Vienna. When you map the placement of early lamp posts and compare them to rooftop terminal positions, patterns emerge. Lamps align beneath spires. Lamps cluster beneath domes. Lamps form grids that correspond to architectural features directly above them. This makes no sense for gaslighting. But it makes perfect sense for a system designed to channel, distribute, or resonate energy through both ground and air. The lamps were not isolated devices. They were connected physically, geometrically, intentionally to the buildings around them. The rooftop finials reinforce this connection. Many are identical in shape to lamp crowns, only scaled up. Some include hollow shafts. Others include multiple stacked metal plates. These structures appear on buildings without any gas system at all. Why would a rooftop of a hotel or a municipal building sport a decorative crown identical to a street lamp's vent assembly? What functional overlap could exist between a gas lamp and a rooftop ornament? Unless they were parts of the same original network, receivers, emitters, resonant amplifiers, terminals, before being downgraded and reinterpreted in the gas era. At this point, the skeptical viewer might offer standard counter-arguments. Perhaps Victorian artisans simply favored similar styles. Perhaps the metallurgy is coincidental. Perhaps the underground structures had other uses. Perhaps the alignments are aesthetic. But these explanations crumble when placed together. Victorian artisans did not coordinate at a global scale. Metallurgical consistency across continents is not coincidence. Underground radial hubs do not serve ornamental purposes. And aesthetic ornamentation does not produce functional geometric grids. Next, we consider historical documents, especially municipal records. One would expect clear, detailed descriptions of how gas lamps were installed and maintained, given the scale of operation. But instead, the records are fragmented, contradictory, often retroactively edited. Some cities claim to have run tens of thousands of gas lamps before building their first gas production plants. Others document maintenance workflows that contradict physical realities. Too few lamplighters, too little gas supply, inconsistencies in pressure regulation that should have caused system-wide failures. Yet the lamps, in countless photographs, appear stable, evenly lit, reliable. Something does not add up. If we turn the hypothesis around, if we assume the lamps were originally part of a different energy system, these contradictions dissolve. Gas was not the original source. Gas was a retrofit, a temporary solution, a repurposing of hardware inherited from an older civilization whose infrastructure remained partially intact. Now we arrive at the most uncomfortable segment. Why was such a system erased? Why hide it? Why remove it so aggressively between 1880 and 1910? Here, too, the historical context speaks. In this period, electrical companies, telegraph monopolies, and emerging industrial powers were consolidating control. A decentralized, atmospheric system, freely accessible, unmetered, distributed, would pose a threat to every economic model of the 20th century. Centralization demands removal of competing networks, and so the ornate lamps vanished. The underground nodes were destroyed. The rooftop terminals were dismantled or declared decorative. The architectural language was rewritten. And yet, traces remain. Not in museums, where replicas replaced originals, but in scattered relics, hidden in courtyards, in private collections, embedded in old facades, buried beneath modern streets. Each one a silent witness to a story rewritten. In the next part, we step back from the evidence and explore the implications. What it means for our understanding of history if the lamps were indeed remnants of a forgotten technological world. Because if this is true, then the past is not merely misunderstood, it is censored. And we are left with the fragments of a civilization whose fingerprints remain on every ornate lamp, every impossible facade, every geometric alignment we were taught not to see. If everything we have uncovered so far is even partially true, then we are no longer dealing simply with gas lamps, forgotten metalwork, or quaint relics of a Victorian aesthetic. We are confronting something far larger, something that touches the very core of how we understand history. Because when a puzzle piece from the past refuses to fit, you do not discard the piece. You question the puzzle. And the deeper we reflect on the evidence, the clearer it becomes that the lamps are not merely anomalies. They are symbols. Symbols of a world that may have existed before ours. A world whose technological language still whispers through the stones and metals our cities stand upon. To contemplate this possibility is to confront an uncomfortable truth. That history is not a clear, linear progression, but a series of layers. Some preserved, some repurposed, some erased. And if the gas lamps were indeed the final visible terminals of a forgotten energy network, then they represent a layer that was deliberately scraped away. Not because it was trivial, but because it was powerful. Imagine for a moment that the architecture we take for granted, the domes of old cathedrals, the spires of ancient administrative buildings, the copper crowns on grand hotels, was once part of an integrated system, not decorative, but functional, not symbolic, but electrical. Imagine that the lamp posts were not simple holders of flame, but nodes, channels through which atmospheric or ground-based energy flowed, lighting streets without combustion, illuminating cities without centralized grids, powering an urban environment, not through extraction, but through resonance. What would that imply about the people who built it? Who were they? How did they understand energy, architecture, material science? And how much of their world survived into the 1800s? Quietly, anonymously, mistaken for mere ornamentation by the societies that inherited their cities. This hypothesis forces us to reevaluate not only the lamps, but the broader architectural ecosystem they existed within. Buildings that seemed overly ornate now appear deliberately shaped. Patterns once dismissed as decorative flourish resemble harmonic geometries. Spires once seen as stylistic excess resemble capacitive terminals. Rooftop finials arranged in symmetrical grids raise questions about transmission, reception, and energy pathways. When viewed through this lens, the entire cityscape transforms from a collection of individual structures into a single interconnected machine, an urban engine whose components were misinterpreted as the centuries passed. And then comes the emotional weight of the reflection: what else have we lost? If the lamps were part of a larger technological layer, then the erasure was not accidental. A system that provided decentralized energy, free, ambient, and open, would be deeply incompatible with the economic systems emerging in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A world being reshaped by monopolies, patents, utilities, centralized grids, and industrial empires has no place for infrastructure that empowers individuals or decentralizes power. The disappearance of the ornate lamps coincides perfectly with the rise of centralized energy control. It coincides with urban redevelopment projects that replaced old foundations with modern grids. It coincides with telegraph companies complaining about interference from old metal structures. It coincides with the rewriting of architectural history to de-emphasize unexplained engineering features. Was it a cover-up? A misunderstanding? A cultural shift so dramatic that the old system simply had no place within the new one? Whatever the answer, the erasure feels deliberate. Reflecting on these implications leads to a deeper philosophical question. Why do we assume progress always moves forward? Our textbooks propose a ladder, each generation climbing higher than the last. But what if history is not a ladder, but a cycle? What if civilizations rise, reach technological heights, collapse, and are forgotten, leaving their descendants to rediscover fragments of the past as ornaments or decorations? The lamps begin to resemble fossils of technology, artifacts whose purpose was lost not through conspiracy, but through time. And yet, the speed and thoroughness of their removal suggest more than simple forgetfulness. There is also a psychological implication. If a lost infrastructural system once illuminated our cities using principles we no longer understand, then our sense of modern superiority is shaken. We are forced to confront the possibility that technological knowledge is not linear, that it can be lost as easily as it is gained, and that human civilization may have experienced resets, interruptions, or disruptions deeper than we imagine. This leads to a more intimate reflection. What would it mean for us today if the past still held secrets capable of transforming our present? If the old system harnessed atmospheric energy, could we rediscover it? Should we? What would free, ambient, decentralized energy mean in a world built on scarcity, profit, and consumption? Would it liberate us or threaten the systems that structure modern life? And beyond the material questions lies something subtler, a sense of awe, a sense of standing on the remnants of a forgotten world, a sense of walking through cities that contain machines disguised as monuments, circuits disguised as plazas, and technology disguised as ornamentation. Once you see the possibility, the world becomes larger, stranger, more layered. Every old building becomes a clue. Every metal crown becomes a question. Every forgotten lamp base becomes a whisper from another age. And this change in perspective is perhaps the most important implication of all. Because the true value of this investigation is not whether we prove the hypothesis beyond all doubt, but whether we allow ourselves to imagine, carefully, responsibly, bravely, that the world is older and more complex than we thought, that our ancestors may have known things we have forgotten, that the past is not silent but censored, and that history, like the lamp grids themselves, may contain patterns we have yet to decipher. In the final part, we return to the present moment, reviewing the journey we've taken and considering what it means to keep searching. Because mysteries are not meant to be solved once and for all. They are invitations, gateways, open doors leading to deeper understanding. And the forbidden gas lamps of Tartaria, whether misunderstood or deliberately erased, are one of those doors. We have walked a long path to reach this point. What began as a simple question? Why were the gas lamps of the 1800s so ornate, so overengineered, so globally standardized, has unfolded into something far greater, something that now stretches far beyond the lamps themselves. It has led us through buried conduits and forgotten rooftops, across continents and through archives, into the very architecture of the cities we thought we understood. And now, at the threshold of everything we've uncovered, the truth feels both more distant and more present than ever. Because in the end, the forbidden gas lamps are not just physical objects, they are mirrors. Mirrors reflecting a forgotten layer of our world, a layer we have been trained not to see. Every crown, every spire, every hollow pillar becomes a clue pointing toward an infrastructure that once connected the ground beneath our feet with the sky above our heads. A system that may have illuminated streets and buildings in ways our textbooks cannot explain. A system that perhaps operated not on gas or fire, but on resonance, atmospheric, architectural, vibrational. What makes this compelling is not a single piece of evidence, but the convergence of them all. The metallurgy that exceeds its era. The underground grids that defy the logic of combustion-based lighting. The rooftop finials that match the geometry of lamp crowns. The photographic illumination that looks inexplicably even. The rapid, coordinated removal of these lamps, just as centralized electrical networks rose to dominance. These are not isolated quirks. These are fingerprints, tracks left behind by a system erased but not forgotten, because its bones still stand in the silent corners of our cities. And now we stand before the most profound question of all. What does it mean for us if this is true? It means that history is not what we think it is, that the 1800s may have inherited far more than they invented, that we, as inheritors of the modern world, are living atop technological ruins, not ruins made of broken stone, but ruins made of forgotten knowledge. It means that architecture was never just architecture, that the ornate facades of old cities were not simply aesthetic. They were functional, vibrational, harmonic. That the line between beauty and technology was once thinner than we ever imagined. It means that the idea of progress, linear, triumphant, ever upward, may be an illusion. Civilizations rise, fall, and are forgotten not because they lacked brilliance, but because the next age failed to understand or preserve what they left behind. And perhaps in the 1800s, a generation of people walked through the remnants of a system they could no longer interpret, lighting fires and devices built for something far more sophisticated. It means that the erasure of these lamps was not aesthetic modernization, but an ideological reset. A sweeping effort, intentional or structural, to overwrite the past with a narrative better suited to the emerging industrial age. A narrative that placed invention, patents, and centralized control at the center of human life. A narrative that required the quiet burial of decentralized, atmospheric energy systems that no longer fit the New World Order. And it means one final haunting truth. We have forgotten something important. Not a myth, not a legend, but a technology, a way of shaping cities that blended art, science, geometry, and energy into a seamless whole. A technology that functioned not through wires and combustion, but through the invisible rhythms of nature itself. Whether that system harnessed atmospheric charge, ground currents, acoustic resonance, or something else entirely, remains uncertain. But the clues whisper insistently that something once existed, something we have yet to rediscover. This realization reshapes how we move through our own lives. When you walk through an old city now, look up. Look at the rooftops, the spires, the finials, the domes. Look at the stone bases, still standing where lamps once were. Look at the underground plans of districts that were modernized in suspiciously coordinated waves. Once your eyes open, it becomes impossible to unsee the patterns. The world becomes layered, living, resonant. The forbidden gas lamps of Tartaria are no longer mere curiosities. They are invitations to question, invitations to look deeper, invitations to reconsider what we believe about the past. They beckon us toward a broader understanding of human history, one in which technological knowledge does not always move forward, where losses are as significant as gains, and where the truth may lie buried beneath the narratives we inherited rather than the facts we uncovered. And now, as we reach the end of this investigation, the question shifts from what happened to what will we choose to see next? There are countless other clues waiting in plain sight. Architectural harmonics, strange rooftop devices, unexplained engineering features hiding in buildings we walk past every day. Our exploration does not end with lamps. Lamps were merely the doorway. Our journey continues. If you've been captivated by this investigation, if these patterns, these clues, these possibilities resonate with you, then stay with me. There is so much more to explore. We've only just scratched the surface of the world that once was and the world it left behind. So, before you leave, I invite you to be part of this ongoing search. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next investigation. Like this video if it sparked something in you. And share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what other forgotten technologies or architectural mysteries you think we should explore together. Because this story, our story, is far from over. And the more of us who begin looking, truly looking, the harder it becomes for the forgotten past to stay hidden in the dark.